Let us demonstrate how to create an array by using the steps that we covered before. So the very first thing is to create this formula that we mentioned previously that will basically stores the data type that you want to store, the identifier, and then this equals new to create a new instance of the array. Remember that the data type here must match with the very first part of the entire definition. Inside of those square brackets is when you put the capacity that you want to have in this array. The next thing is to populate, which means that you're going to specify the array at position 0 will contain the following values. What we just did is that we populate the array from position 0 all the way to position 4 with the values that were given us initially. Notice that we start at position 0 and we go all the way to array position 4. We don't store the value 5 inside of the square brackets because that will give us an array index out of bounds. The next thing is to print them. So if we store the values in the array at position, all those indices, probably will be natural to just print the value of A as the array. But I just want you to see what's happening in this particular example. By compiling this program, we got this hexadecimal address location that we already talked about. So this is where that array is being stored in the memory based on the Java formulation. So how can we print these values? Well, one way to do it is by basically specifying each index. By specifying each index, that will actually ask Java to go to that particular index and print those values, as we can see. I'm going to create another example so you can see how can we reduce this part. Let's just create another variation of our array example 01. But instead of just having this declaration, I'm going to use the shortcut. Since we already know these values, it's probably easier to have just store them into the curly brackets. For example, we can just say that array will contain the value of 5 and 3 and 2 and 24 and 7. And we don't have to do all line by line. The only thing we have to do is to accommodate it into the very first line. Remember that this is called the shortcut and only is helpful when you know the values beforehand. There's a trade-off. Once we create the array, like in our previous example, once we establish this value there, we're gonna stop with that for the rest of the program's life. Sometimes we will have to reaccommodate or expand in that memory later on, and that's gonna be a hassle later on. But let's for now not worry too much. But this value is very important because that's the way you're gonna store that information in memory. In our shortcut, since we already know these values, we can just put it easily enclosed in that curly bracket. Let's save, compile, and run this program. As you can see, we got the same result. Let's make another variation of array example 02, but this time let's reduce the statements. There's a lot of repetition here, and that's unacceptable. I mean, this is kind of cute when you have 5, but what happens, for example, if these values get expanded? For example, suppose that we have more random values here. Suppose that we have more values, what are you going to do? Are you going to do this? I think we have 29 values here. And what we're going to do is that we're going to print from array position 0 all the way to 28 because that's the last value that we can try to access. Let's save, compile, and run, and let's see what happens. I mean, we were able to print those 29 values, I believe. Now, the only problem is that if you show this piece of code to your boss, they're going to tell you you're super fired. This is not good. Where you took these classes of programming, this is ridiculous. Let's not get super fired and let's try to make this nicer. How can you print all those values that we're just providing without doing this system out print line? Obviously, a loop is the solution because look how many repetitions we have of the same statement. So once we identify the statement that we want to repeat, we only need one of those statements, and we need the for loop that goes like this. We're gonna start at position 0 because it's a 0 base. We're gonna go as long as I is less than a.length. A.length is the key part here. A.length will go here to the array A and tell you, hey, tell me how many values you're holding. This guy is gonna tell you 29. Okay, so this will be treated as a 29, and it makes sense because relational operators are Boolean relational operators, which means that you're going to compare an int versus an int, and the result should be true or false. So here, the only thing we're going to do in the meanwhile, we're going to put it inside of the body of the loop, and instead of putting just the value of 0 or 1 or 2 or 3, we just put in the value of I, which is the control variable. Let's save, compile, and run this program. There you are, basically getting the same result without using 30 lines of code for whatever reason. This is elegant, this is nice, and help us to go, and you can put more values if you want. You can put out thousands, maybe 1 million of values here, good luck. And with this piece of code that you have here from line 5 to line 7, this is a very powerful piece of code that will help us to print all the values. It doesn't matter if there are 3 values or 5 million or 2,000, it will be printing all the values from that array.